Hi, and welcome to the Teach and Learning Archive, session 5. In today's session, we're going to be looking at Teach Like a Champion, which is written by Doug Lemov. Doug Lemov was a school leader who got interested in the performance of high-performing teachers in the state where he worked. And essentially, he spent a lot of time decamped in their classrooms, looking at their teaching techniques. And in Teach Like a Champion 2.0 here, he summarizes or attempts to summarize some of the techniques they use. And there are 62 techniques in here, of which I've been having a look at a few. Now, today I want to have a look at technique 46, which is called Strong Start. Now, Strong Start is essentially designing and establishing an efficient routine for students to enter the classroom and begin the class. And the emphasis here is about building routine in the classroom, so the students would, over time, be able to carry out these tasks efficiently without being told. And it is about that start, about breaking down, make a distinction about how they enter the classroom and then how they begin the first task which they're given. At its heart, it seeks to do a few things. A few other things it's really about is maximizing learning time. It's precious time that we have with the students. It's also about controlling the students' attention, because as they make that transition from the corridors, which sometimes can be very social, into the classroom, it's about trying to get that habit of switching their attention from social conversations into what is that learning environment. It's also about building mastery, so that reviewing of previous work, that's retrieval, that's giving that time, which could be dead time, but making it very productive, so it allows them to build mastery and stuff that we've done previously with them. And also, it may also support the learning that's going to happen today, which we call priming, so priming that knowledge which we want students to attend to within the lesson. And finally, and maybe most importantly, it's about building, as we said before, that efficient routine for every lesson. So there's a kind of automaticity about the start to the lesson, where they're not having to think about what they need to do. Now, a strong start can be broken into, or Teach Like a Champion breaks strong start into 3 sections. A section called Door to Do Now. So the Do Now task is what follows. So the Do Now task up in the second one. Up there, the Do Now task is really, I guess, I suspect what most of us would think of what retrieval or space practice exercise we want our kids to do. So Door to Do Now is really what happens as the kids come through the door and get to the Do Now task. So they go from Door to Do Now, then to Do Now, and then they do the Do Now task is done, and then there's a Review Now. So Strong Start is broken down into those 3 elements, which we'll look at. So Door to Do Now is, as I said, how do students get from the door to their Do Now? Now, technique 21 in Teach Like a Champion is called Name the Steps. And naming the steps is really about how we build routines, go from procedures, like we set procedures at the start of the year, and how do we get from procedure into building routines which happen without us having to ask students. So naming the steps is really, as it sounds, it's about naming the steps and making it very clear to students. So maybe this would be my way of naming the steps, which I would like to ideally happen in my classroom. So step 1, students will enter silently. That transition across what we call a threshold from the corridor into the classroom, they enter silently. They collect their book, and this happens in lots of classrooms where the teacher will kind of lay the books out so they're easily collected by students. They don't have to rifle through a pile. They just kind of grab their book off the nearest table as they spread out. They take their SLB and pencil case out of their bag. In my classroom, I'd like them to place their coat and bag in the rack. It's a science classroom. That's therefore bags and coats go in the rack. They go to their allocated seats. Allocated seats are important because kids aren't having to think about where they need to sit in the classroom. There's no sort of cognitive thought. There is the kind of an automatic approach to it. And then they start the Do Now task immediately and silently. So that process of naming the steps is, Teach Like a Champion says, it allows the students to internalize that process. And if there's any sort of error in it, then it's easy to refer to students where they might be just slightly getting it wrong. So that's Door to Do Now. The Do Now task then, so we shift into the Do Now tasks. There are 4 criteria that now tasks should fulfill, as described by Teach Like a Champion. They should be consistent in their placement and format, so keeping it as consistent as possible. And the rationale for that is you don't want students to have to think or ask, what are we doing today? So on this, it's kind of, there's a consistency in terms of their cognitive thoughts, and not about what are we doing. It's actually about solving the problems or completing the task which has been given to them. They should be able to be completed independently without the help from the teacher or other students. And again, the rationale there is controlling that switch in attention. That it's quite difficult for some students to switch from conversations in corridors into like work mode. So having that kind of that quiet switching, and some kids take 3 to 5 minutes to do that, is a really important part of the lesson. They also say they should require a written response, and you can see that that's to increase the rigor and accountability. It creates something very, very visible for teachers to hold students accountable to. And they should either review a recent lesson, so retrieval style, or, as I said previously, preview or prime the knowledge required for today's lesson. Now, so we have gone from the door to do now. So we've gone through the door into do now. We've done do now. So towards the end of do now, Teach Like a Champion would prescribe that it would circulate. Okay, that would make sense. And that's really to optimize that transition into review now. So trying to get that timing right, where students have had sufficient time to get into the review now section. So the completion rate is pretty high, 80 to 90%, but without kids sat around for ages waiting, obviously. So then we hit review now. So review now we could think of taking one of 3 options. So option 1 in the review now would be, we could just do a straight check and change. So you teach, this is teacher-led, where the teacher would maybe go through the answers and the students would check their answers and change if they needed to. Now the benefits of this is it's quicker. As much as if you want to get into the lesson quicker, then that would be the way probably to go. Option 2 is to use cold calling. So, and the cold calling has its own benefits. So clearly you can check for understanding. So you can elicit response for students, but also in that kind of conversation and that checking for understanding, you can hold students to account, help them to improve answers, increase the rigor by which they answer things. So there's a chance for feedback there. Or option 3, you can use a hybrid. So in review now, you could look at those 3 options. So just some reflective questions to leave you with. So I'll pop some reflective questions up, and you can either do these on your own, if you're sat on your own, or better still, you can talk through with your team. So here they are. So if you have a read through and chat about those.